So it's been a little while ago, but as I look back on it, I look back on this moment in my life a little differently than I did when I was much closer to it. In April of 2004, I was in a staff meeting at my first church. I was a youth pastor in the Woodlands at a church in these days from 98 till '04. And I was in a staff meeting with our new pastor. We had just brought a new pastor into town, and I had actually driven a big old van up to get all of his books. He was a reader. So I brought this new pastor in, and we were at a staff meeting in April, and while we were in our meeting together, I said to him and to the room, I said, hey man, graduation Sunday's coming. It's just a handful of weeks away, and I've done it kind of the way I do it for the last 6 years. Maybe you have some ideas of how we could do it a little bit differently. I said, I'd love to introduce you to what we've done and welcome you into the conversation for what we do this coming year. And he said, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't we talk about it right after staff today? Perfect. So staff meeting ends, and I said to him, I said, hey, do you want to meet here in your office, or do you want to meet in my office? He goes, well, why don't you go get your stuff, and we'll just meet in the library. Okay, that sounds good. So I ran down to my office and I grabbed my stuff and I come back to the library, and when I walked into the library, I found that pastor and 2 other men sitting at a table. All the many blinds had been closed to the library. And I was motioned to a seat, the empty seat at the table, and as I sat there, they pushed a piece of paper across the table to me. And they said, Brent, we'd like you to resign. And in my head, I'm like, this is like I'm getting punked. Like, I've been here 6 years. My mother-in-law is one of the elders at this church. My wife held a shovel at the groundbreaking of this church. Surely it's going to go down differently than this if I come to the point where I'm not good enough. But each of the men at the table told me why I was being asked to leave. They wanted me to leave the next month. And I sat there dumbfounded. What in the world is happening to me? What have I done? What could I have done? The meeting comes to a close. The men give me an invitation to speak, to which I said, I'm not sure that anything I have to say right now would be helpful for me or for you, and so no, I have nothing to say. Thank you for your time. And I picked up the piece of paper and I went back to my office and tried to get back to work because I had graduation Sunday coming. But as you can imagine, overcome with emotion, I couldn't really get any work done. I went upstairs to our youth room and tried to pray there and completely lost it. Went home, told my wife. I walked in, she said, hey, how'd your day go today, babe? I said, babe, I got fired today. What? I'm calling. I said, no. Very protective. She's my biggest fan and my biggest cheerleader. But the piece of paper had said, if you go quietly, we'll give you a severance, and if you tell anybody what's happened, we'll fire you. And so I went quietly. And that was back in the year 2004, and as you can tell, there's still a little bit of pain from that moment as I relive it in my own memory. But I'll tell you this, if I'm doing my math right, 22 years later, I'm sitting with you. I would have never been sitting with you had I not experienced that moment. When you're in the middle of a thing, it's much harder to see how it might turn out 20 years later. As I thought about the story of Joseph that we're sharing today, I find myself very much walking in his shoes. And I'm hopeful that somewhere between my story of my own life and Joseph's story of his life, that we might get to the end of this moment together and you might have the kind of faith that Joseph had to be able to say the kinds of things that Joseph said years after he went through his own difficult moment. A difficult moment like what I went through. The story of Joseph is a part of a series that we're in the middle of. We're calling it Giants. We're going through several of the folks, the men and the women that we find in Hebrews chapter 11, the heroes of the faith, the hall of fame as it were. And today it's Joseph. We had Abraham the first week and Samson the next week. And last week I talked about Noah, and this week it's Joseph. And you can find Joseph's story. It's a really long story. It moves from Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50. We don't have time for me to read the whole thing, so I'm going to try to summarize it the best I can. It picks up in 37. Genesis is the very first book of your Old Testament Bible. It's one of the easier ones to find on a Sunday morning. So if you want to try to flip through as we go, feel free to try to keep up and try to catch up. Chapter 37, I'm just going to read a few verses as we go through these chapters, pulling out the parts of the story that are helpful to get the whole story together, and then we'll go from there. In verses 3 and 4, now Israel, who's also named Jacob, that's important for us to keep in mind. Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, is also called Israel in the scriptures. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream. Can you imagine? They're so excited to hear about this next dream. I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Not just y'all, but all of creation. So Joseph from the very beginning has a really fancy coat. You may have heard the Technicolor dream coat. He has the jacket. He's having the dreams. He's the favorite son. Dad says so, and they all believe it. He says so. They can't stand it. So he's one day hanging out with Dad, and the other brothers go out to the fields, and the father says, hey, go check on your brothers. Okay, I can't wait. Let's go. Goes out, checks on the boy. The rest of the guys are out there working. They see this little punk brother of theirs on his way. And they say, we got to get rid of this guy. This guy's been no good for us. Let's get rid of him. So in summary, they put a little plan together. Let's just throw him in the cistern, empty cistern. I'm sure that hurt when he hit the bottom. And then they decided, no, that won't work. Let's pull him out of the cistern. The Midianites are coming by. Why don't we sell him to them? They'll take him far, far away. We'll never have to see him again. But what are we going to tell Dad when we don't come back with his favorite child? Got an idea? Take that coat, let's dip it in some goat's blood and bring it back to him, and we'll just convince our father that his favorite son has died. So that's the plan, and that's the way they go at it. In verses 34 to 36, when they get back with this, Jacob tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Now, if you're reading through this chapter, one of the brothers, Judah, ends up getting a full chapter devoted to him, but we're just going to skip forward to chapter 39, because in chapter 39 is where we pick up on Joseph being there in Potiphar's home, now with Potiphar's wife. In chapter 39, we find that in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. This is going to be an ongoing thing that we're going to find out, is that Joseph never is left by God. God never leaves Joseph. Even in this moment, he's been sold into slavery by his own brothers, but God has not left him. So now we find Joseph in Potiphar's home. Potiphar's wife sees Joseph, and this is what happens next. Joseph, it says in the Bible, was well-built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But Joseph refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he's trusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am, and my master tells me that he's not withheld anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. But she's relentless. And she's constantly trying to lure him and trick him, and on one occasion has him very near to being tricked, and he's trying to get away. She takes his cloak, he gets away, and then she goes to Potiphar and lies about him. Says, "Look what he's tried to do to me. I've got coat evidence." So Joseph is put in prison. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God hasn't left him. While in prison, he has this opportunity to interpret dreams. Remember, he's the dreamer. He knows how to interpret dreams. Now he's interpreting other people's dreams. And we're introduced in chapter 40 to a cupbearer and a baker. Things go well for the cupbearer, not so well for the baker. They both have dreams, can't be interpreted. Joseph interprets them. Cupbearer goes off to have a good life, and baker's life shortly ends. The Pharaoh ends up having dreams. He needs those things interpreted. Joseph comes along. He's been noted as a dream interpreter. So he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. As he's interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, he uncovers for the Pharaoh that, hey man, you're in charge of this great land. It's a great land, but things are about to get bad. There's gonna be 7 years of really prosperous moments around here, and then it's gonna be followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh's so excited. Potiphar so excited about all this that now he puts Joseph in charge. He says, hey, you're really good at what you're doing, and since you see these things coming, I trust that maybe you should be in charge as they come. So now Joseph is in charge. And we have Joseph. Let me tell you more about what happens here in chapter 41, starting in verse 53. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. Remember, 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. The 7 years of famine began just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all of Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. All the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt, so go down there and buy some for us so that we will not die. And he does. They do exactly that. They go, they get the grain. While they're there getting the grain, they're asked by Joseph, though they don't know it's Joseph, hey, I need you to leave one of your brothers behind while you take this back home. And there's some negotiating, some conversation. Finally, they say, okay. In doing so, this little memory of when they had mistreated their brother pops up. And they start to wonder if maybe they're having to leave this brother behind because of what they've done to their other brother. And they leave a little bit fearful. They head back, wondering if they've been punished by God. They go home. They realize they're going to be in big trouble with dad for leaving a son behind. But while they're eating the grain back home, the grain runs out, and they realize we need to go back again. They go back to the guy who they don't realize is Joseph. And it says, picking up in chapter 43, that now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all that grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back, buy us a little more food. The grain's running out. They've got to go back. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a couple chapters. Let's get to chapter 45. Because this is the moment when Joseph, who has been kind to his brothers, they have no idea it's been him, but now they're about to find out. They're about to find out who is showing them such kindness. Picking up in chapter 45, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Can you imagine? Joseph says to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. I'll provide for you there because the 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong will become destitute. And then to prove it even more to his brothers, he says, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it's really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you've seen, and bring my father down here quickly. And then he threw a few punches. No, that's not what he did. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin, and he wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers, and he wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. Joseph has a chance to really cause harm to those who have caused him harm. Can you imagine all those years of pent-up frustration? I just hope I get to see those boys one day. I'm going to give it to them. And after all that's gone on, when he has the chance to see them again, at first glance, he hides himself from them. I don't know why he hid from them ultimately. But in the end, when he finally admits, hey, remember me? He doesn't do it in a told you so. He doesn't do it in a you owe me something. He doesn't do it in a you should pay. He does it with words like, you did not even do this to me. The Lord did this. You were participating in what the Lord was doing. I mean, he actually comes back in chapter 50 to say just like this. Jacob comes and Joseph gets reunited with dad, and then Jacob blesses the rest of the boys because he's about to die. He does die. And then we get to chapter 50 where Joseph reiterates those earlier statements to these brothers of his. In verse 18, when his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph, they said, we are your slaves. You see, now with dad out of the picture, they could try to figure out, is Joseph going to treat us kindly now that dad's gone, or was he just putting on a show because he wanted to impress dad? Well, now dad's out of the picture, and they've bowed down in fear once again, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me. He's reiterating this. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children. And he reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. In this prolonged story of Joseph, there's so many more details in here that I've left out, so much more to the story, but here's the part of the story I just don't want you to miss. It's the part that the Lord keeps reminding me of. Joseph is harmed. He knows who harmed him. He suffers under the harmful, as a result of their treating him harshly. He ends up in prison, and then he has Potiphar's wife being unkind to him, and he's in prison, and he's going through all this hard stuff. It seems like at the hands of someone else. But somehow in the midst of it all, he can say to his perpetrators, the brothers, what you did was actually for my good. Joseph sees and explains to them something that maybe you've heard more recently, that while we play checkers, God is playing chess. Now, I've relived my firing a number of times over the years. I've had an opportunity to be reconciled with those who caused me harm. Had an opportunity to let go of all the pain that I had carried with me, all the hatred that I had felt towards them, and just lay it aside. I've even had the opportunity to re-embrace those that I wanted to cause harm to. And funny as it may be, one of the men who sat at that table to release me in 2004 is now a member of our church. What was intended in my mind for harm, the Lord brought about good. There's much more that I'd like to say, but I kind of want to leave it with this. I don't really know what all of you are going through. I don't know the hard thing that you're walking through in this current moment. I don't know the hard thing that you've walked through in your past. I don't know if the hard thing that you're walking through is the result of somebody else's harsh treatment, someone else's bad decisions, someone else's intentional act to cause harm to you. But the story of Joseph seems to uncover that if we can step away, if we can step back, if we can become curious, it's possible that what another intended for harm, God not only will, but maybe even is in this moment using for good. For your good, for our good, for the future of his kingdom's good. So I think I want to end this morning just praying into that. Praying into and hoping alongside of you that what we read about in Joseph, what I found firsthand in my church work might be true for you. So would you join me? God, I find that in my own life, sometimes I get so hyper-focused on a very small moment, a very short experience, and I allow it to become my whole world. Sometimes, God, I'm walking through a season that feels long, because it kind of is. Maybe it's days long or weeks long. Maybe even a handful of years long. And I just suspect that there's people in the room, a room filled with this many people, there are people in the room today who are currently or have recently or have a while back walked through a moment that they are still trying to make sense of. They're trying to figure out, why did that happen? Or why did that person do that? Or why did that person say that? I'm just wondering, Lord, if this morning you're inviting us to change the question. Because quite honestly, we may never get an answer to the why did they do that? Why did they say that? Why is this happening? But from a God who says that you will never leave us or forsake us, from a God who is described as one who can work all things together for good, for those who love him, From that kind of a God, it seems we can ask the question, Lord, where are you moving? How could what happened be for your good? How are you working things together right now in a way that will ultimately be for my own good, for the good of my community, and as part of your salvation story? God, it's possible that in this looking back, we're being invited, maybe challenged, to be reconciled. Or at minimum, to offer forgiveness to that person who hurt us. To forgive the circumstances that resulted in harm towards us. And so, Lord, right now, if there's a person that's coming to mind for us, a memory that's bubbling up, we just sit in that moment right now for a moment. Just a few seconds. And with all the faith we can muster up, with all the grace that we can muster up, we ask you, Lord, to forgive them. We ask you, Lord, to bless them. And God, if we have, or if we will, find ourselves like Joseph, being able to look back and say, man, God, look what you did even through that. That we might believe that that person who harmed us, that situation that harmed us, that you might also be redeeming it, redeeming them. I just thank you, Lord, that you are a redeeming God, that you can take anything that we sinful humans do to you or to one another, and you can fix it, turn it around, and even bring good from it. And we pray that you'll do that in the experience we've been praying through for ourselves just now. We expect you to, and we trust you to. This is our prayer.